Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on Between the Lines of Scripture. I'm your host, Dennis Cole, and in this episode, we're going deep into the Olivet Discourse, and we're going to walk through Luke 21, beginning in verse 5. The Olivet Discourse doesn't come out of nowhere. Jesus is not giving detached prophecy for curiosity's sake. He's speaking after a long collision with Israel's leadership, after judgment language, after lament, and after the disciples have just admired the temple. So this is not merely a lesson about chronology. It is a lesson about judgment, covenant, accountability, deception, endurance, and hope. So we're beginning in Luke 21, verse 5, and it reads, Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? Now, there are basically three major ways Christians have approached the Olivet Discourse. The preterist, or largely first century view, much of all of the discourse refers to Jerusalem's fall in AD 70. Then there is the dual fulfillment view. Jesus speaks first of Jerusalem's destruction, but the language stretches forward to his final coming. And finally, the futurist view. While the temple destruction is included, much of the discourse is mainly about the end of the age and future tribulation. The disciples are asking when, and instead of answering them, Jesus gives them a warning. In verse 8, he says, Watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming, I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. Jesus doesn't begin with a date, but with a warning about deception. This is striking. The disciples ask for signs. Jesus first warns them about being misled. He is emphasizing that they know truth so that they will not be deceived by false teachings. As an example, the United States Secret Service is tasked with seeking out, finding, and prosecuting those who create counterfeit money. When new agents are first trained, they're not given counterfeit currency in order to learn what is fake. Instead, they're all sat down in a room and given a real $100 bill and a magnifying glass. They sit there and they study every square inch of that bill over and over again, front and back, until they know it completely by heart. By doing so, they can spot a fake bill from a mile away. I preached memorizing the Nicene Creed to you guys on a regular basis, but the concept here is the same. When you know the truth, you can easily spot the lie. So back to the text. Verse 9. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen, but the end will not come right away. These signs are real, but Jesus also says, in effect, do not panic too quickly. In Matthew, the end is not yet. In Luke, however, he says these things must first take place, but the end will not be at once. So the signs are not given to create hysteria, but steadiness. R.C. Sproul, one of my favorite commentators, many Christians mistakenly treat every disaster as a coded countdown, when Jesus is actually warning against premature conclusions. What he is discussing are characteristic troubles of the age, not necessarily a single neat timetable. In other words, these things are going to happen. You know that now. Just be calm and carry on. In verse 10, he says to them, Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilence in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. Obviously now, our abilities to see what is happening on the other side of the world in real time is here. We are more aware of these events than ever. They've always been happening, but now we don't need word of mouth to come to us in a year or a month or a week after the event, nor do we need tomorrow's morning newspaper or even the news at 11. It's in the smartphone that is in the palm of our hands, and we can see it as it happens. In verse 12, he says, before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, all on account of my name. Verse 13, and you will bear testimony to me, but make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair on your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life. Jesus reframes suffering not as a defeat, but as a mission. Opposition advances the gospel rather than silencing it. Jesus instructs his followers not to prescript their defense. This does not prohibit preparation in general, but it emphasizes reliance on God's immediate provision of wisdom. Faithfulness matters more than rhetorical skill. God supplies what obedience requires. Jesus intensifies the warning by naming family betrayal. Loyalty to Christ may fracture the most trusted relationships. Allegiance to Christ can cost everything that normally provides security. The cause of hatred is explicit. Because of me. The conflict is not personal temperament or politics, but identification with Jesus. Luke underscores the inevitability of opposition for faithful discipleship. Faithfulness, not popularity, is the measure of discipleship. Jesus promises ultimate preservation, not immunity from suffering. Even death cannot destroy what God secures eternally. God's protection is ultimate, not merely temporary or physical. And Jesus says, stand firm and you will win life. Salvation is shown not by avoidance of trials, but by faithful endurance through them. On to verse 20. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is a time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the day, in his writing, The Jewish War, gives the fullest account of the Roman siege of Jerusalem. He describes famine, internal faction fighting, immense suffering, and the eventual destruction of the city and temple under Titus in AD 70. He records horrors so severe that later readers often find them almost unbearable, including the cannibalism of children during the final period of the siege. Roman encirclement, devastation, and the fall of the temple match Jesus' warnings in striking ways. Jesus tells those in Judea to flee to the mountains. This is practical, local, urgent language. It sounds like an actual historical crisis, not merely symbolic end-time imagery. Luke adds a phrase that has generated enormous discussion. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That's in verse 24. So what does Jesus mean by saying that? And when will the times of the Gentile end? Some say it already has, and for many of us, it happened in our lifetime. Some theologians tie this verse to later historical developments, including 1948 and 1967 as prophetic milestones. This is one interpreted tradition, though certainly not the only one. The times of the Gentiles. Luke mentions that Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This phrase bridges the gap between the fall of the temple and Jesus' eventual return. So what happened in 1948? Israel was created in a day with the stroke of a pen. You see, after World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain control over Palestine. Rising conflict between Jewish and Arab communities led Britain to refer the matter to the United Nations in 1947. On November 29, 1947, The United Nations passed Resolution number 181, proposing one Jewish state, one Arab state, and an international Jerusalem. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, Arab leaders rejected it. When the British mandate ended, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948. Israel became a nation. Israel was recognized almost immediately by the United States and later by the USSR. Neighboring Arab states invaded the next day, beginning the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The results of that war: Israel survived and became the first Jewish state in nearly 2,000 years. So we may ask, was this the fulfillment of prophecy? Well, let's look at Isaiah 66, 7 and 8. Can a land be born in one day? Can a nation be brought forth in a moment? Israel declared statehood in a single day, May 14th, 1948, at 4 p.m. Many see this as an unprecedented historical parallel. And then 1967 happened, the Six-Day War. Surrounding Arab nations and Israel went to war: Egypt, Syria, and Jordan versus Zion. When it was over, a mere 6 days later, Israel had expanded its territory, regained total control of Jerusalem, and established themselves as the territory's only superpower. They were no longer under the thumb of the Gentiles. Then Jesus expands his scope outward. Verse 25. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Jesus shifts to events associated with the coming of the Son of Man and final redemption. This passage looks beyond Jerusalem's fall to a climatic moment in God's plan. Jesus describes cosmic signs and global turmoil. This language draws heavily from Old Testament prophetic imagery, where disturbances in the heavens symbolize divine intervention and judgment, such as Isaiah 13 and Joel 2. Distress of nations conveys a sense of being trapped or overwhelmed, and the roaring of the sea may symbolize chaos, instability, and fear among people and nations, not merely literal storms. The key point there is the world enters a state of unprecedented confusion and anxiety. Verse 26 states that people fainting with fear, with foreboding of what is coming on the world, for the powers of heavens will be shaken. This verse emphasizes psychological impact of these events. Fear is not localized, it is universal. Powers of the heavens reflects the collapse of what humans normally trust for stability and order, whether understood literally or symbolically. Matthew Henry notes that people will feel as though the entire created order is coming apart, producing helplessness and dread. And in verse 27, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. We see this from Daniel 7, 13 and 14, where the Son of Man receives dominion and glory. Here, Jesus openly identifies himself with that figure coming in a cloud. And coming in a cloud signifies divine authority and judgment. Unlike his first coming in humility, this appearance is marked by power and glory. Commentators agree this verse points to Christ's ultimate vindication and his reign. Whether understood as his visible return or divine judgment manifested in history. Verse 28, there's hope for believers. When these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. While the world collapses in fear, believers are told to respond with confidence. Redemption refers to deliverance brought by God, not escape from difficulty, but rescue through it. The contrast is deliberate. For unbelievers, they have fear, collapse, and despair. For believers, there is hope, alertness, and expectation. Luke 21, verses 25 through 28 teaches that history is moving toward Christ, not chaos. While the signs are frightening, Jesus reframes them as birth pangs of redemption, urging his followers to recognize that the very events terrifying the world signal their coming salvation. Verse 29, he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. The point is simple. Signs precede fulfillment. Verse 32, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. These things refers to events Jesus has just outlined, including judgment and upheaval. Jesus contrasts the temporary nature of creation with the permanence of his word. On to verse 34. Jesus says, be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Here Jesus warns not of ignorance, but distraction. The dangers are dissipation, self-indulgence, drunkenness, anxieties of everyday life. The warning is striking. Ordinary life, not rebellion, can dull spiritual alertness. The trap imagery emphasizes suddenness and that it is for everyone. So in verse 36, he says, be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen and that you will be able to stand before the Son of Man. This verse summarizes the proper disciplined response. Watchfulness, that is spiritual attentiveness, prayer, dependence on God, and standing before the Son of Man, confidence, not fear. Escape does not mean avoidance of hardship, but being spiritually preserved and found faithful. Verse 37, each day Jesus was teaching at the temple, and each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to hear him at the temple. During the day, Jesus was teaching in the temple. At night, he went out to the Mount of Olives. This shows Jesus practicing what he taught. Public faithfulness, that is, teaching openly, and private devotion and our withdrawal to pray. The people came early to hear him, showing that watchfulness includes listening to his word. So to summarize what we've just talked about, the Olivet Discourse is not a playground for sensationalism. It is Jesus preparing his disciples, and you and me, for the collapse of the world that they and we thought was permanent. It is a warning that religious institutions can stand tall while being spiritually hollow. It is a promise that persecution will become witness. It is a confirmation that Jesus sees history before it happens. And it is a call to live awake. The temple fell. Jerusalem was judged. The gospel went forward. And the church still lives under Jesus' command. And the message for us is this: do not be deceived. Do not panic, and do not fall asleep. Jesus is in control, and events will transpire as he wishes, just as he foretold. I'm Dennis Cole. Thank you for joining me here again on Between the Line of Scriptures. And I pray that your walk with the Lord is one that blesses you in all aspects of your life. And we'll see you next time. Be blessed.